What's good, everyone? Today is November 30th of 2023, and today we'll be reviewing the numerology of Henry Kissinger, who reportedly passed away yesterday, several months after passing the century mark, the big 100. Kissinger was a highly influential and highly controversial figure in American politics for many decades, even after he served as U.S. Secretary of State in the 1970s. On this channel, we review the world through the lens of ancient mystics who believed that numbers dictate the dates of significant events in our lives, and this is very evident through the codes of Gematria and Horology, a combined study of the numbers behind our alphabet, along with the digits of and between dates on the calendar. There's also an astrological element to this practice, and in the second half of this video, I'll explain how Kissinger's death is aligned with the two great American eclipses, the recent anniversary of Yale University, and of course the number 666, or the number of the beast as many recognize it to be. Before we talk about that, however, let's cover a bit of the basics first. Kissinger's time as the head of the State Department was one of the most tumultuous times in the history of Washington, as he first served under President Richard Nixon, who became the first U.S. president to resign from office, and he did so less than a year after Henry's term began. As such, Henry's death is synced up to that monumental event. Looking at the calendar, Richard Nixon resigned from office on August 9th of 1974, and measuring to the date of Henry Kissinger's death, we find this is a span of 18,010 days. Now, you'll see a couple of zeros in here, and in numerology, it's important to understand that zeros are typically ignored in the result. So what we have here is the number 181. And using the standard alphabetic order, the cipher we call ordinal, the name Henry Kissinger has a numeric value of 181. Now, you'll notice with this measurement, I included the end date, so this includes both the beginning and end dates when you measure. And it's important to understand that although he died yesterday, news of his death was not in mainstream outlets until today, November 30th, which, without the end date, is also 18,010 days. If we do not include the end date, we get a different number, 18,009 days. So here we have the number 189, essentially. And why is that interesting? Well, the 189th prime number is 1129. 1129, much like November 29th, the date of Henry Kissinger's death. His time in office was marred by Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal. And using the same ordinal method, notice how the word Watergate has a gematria value of 100. Henry Kissinger, 100 years old when he passed away. In fact, when he became the Secretary of State under Nixon, he first took office on the 22nd of September, which is the date that leaves 100 days on the calendar. Now, earlier I mentioned how this will be connected to the two great American eclipses. Well, Henry's death on the 29th fell 100 days after the August 21st, which was the date of the first great American eclipse. And again, passing away at the age of 100 years old. Now, in another significant form of gematria called single reduction, here, every double-digit number is added together to get a new number. So, for instance, the letter P, 16th letter. 1 plus 6 is 7, so P takes on the value of a 7. Whereas S, the 19th letter, 1 plus 9 is 10. And in this single reduction method, the name Henry Kissinger sums to 100. In Sumerian gematria, which is the alphabetic order times 6, And we'll talk more about this method in a little bit because the name Kissinger sums to 666 in this cipher. Henry Kissinger sums to 1086, and measuring from his date of birth to the date that he died was 100 years and 186 days, connecting very well to his name Gematria. Also using this single reduction method, Secretary of State sums to 83, and the date that he passed away, 11 plus 29 plus 20 plus 23, gives us a sum of 83. And again, later we'll talk about how this connects to the eclipse and moon code, of which 83 is a very significant number. So Kissinger's role of Secretary of State has been since passed down to Antony Blinken, who is the current Secretary of State under President Joe Biden. And I found it interesting that measuring from Blinken's birthday to the death of Henry Kissinger was 227 days on the calendar. Well, when you write out Henry Alfred Kissinger, his entire name, again using the alphabetic order, we get a sum of 227, and we'll talk about all four of these numbers in the base ciphers of Gematria as we go. When we talk about base Gematria, this includes ordinal and standard reduction or Pythagorean ciphers, which reduce every double-digit number to a single digit. These ciphers also reversed to produce a couple of complementary ciphers to these as well. In fact, measuring from the birth of Antony Blinken to Henry Kissinger's birth gives us 2,029 weeks. And I want to point this out again because the 22nd of September, 22/9, is when Kissinger took office. And what cements this connection is that 229 is the 50th prime number. Also, the 229th verse of Revelation reveals the number of the beast to be 666, a number which we will get to as we go. And I may have missed this, but Henry Kissinger also died a span of 181 days before his next birthday. So forgive me for passing over this earlier, but Henry Kissinger, 181, we looked at this earlier, also dead 181 days before his next birthday. But looking again at this number 50, this is an important number to America, which is made up of 50 states, and in ordinal, America conveniently sums to 50. Kissinger died 50 years after taking office as Secretary of State. In fact, when he became the Secretary, he was also 50 years old. He was the 56th Secretary of State, another number we'll expand on later. But notice how 56 sums to 118. And Kissinger's birth name, Heinz Alfred Kissinger, the German version, also has Latin gematria of 1018. And Kissinger was 118 days after his 50th birthday when he took office. So if you're wondering why he didn't take office when Nixon did, well, there's always more to be uncovered, especially when it comes to the federal government. In standard reduction, Secretary of State sums to 65. And this stands out because the 65th prime number is 313. And in Gematria, Henry Alfred Kissinger sums to 313 in the reverse cipher. Now, measuring from the date he left office, January 20th, inauguration day for Jimmy Carter, who, by the way, just went to his wife's funeral the day before Kissinger's death. Another strong element of synchronicity to all of this. But notice how January 20th, measuring to his death on November 29th, is 313 days on the calendar, matching his name. Furthermore, measuring from the date he left office to the date he died was also 17,114 days. Now, with the end date, this is 115 days. Well, this is the reverse reduction gematria of both his birth and common government names. Heinz Alfred Kissinger, 114. Henry Alfred Kissinger, 115. So as we see here, his birth, his death, completely aligned with the dates that he became Secretary of State, as well as the famous date that Richard Nixon resigned from office back in 1974. And for the record, Richard Nixon sums to 74 as well. A little bit more on Nixon. The word president sums to 110 in the alphabetic order. And when he resigned as president, it was on a date with 110 numerology. Also notice the 38. Well, president does not equal 38 also. Moving on. Let's talk about this code of solar eclipses and how the number 666 ties into all this. Now, when we learned about the death of Henry Kissinger, it was November 30th. And I actually have a lot of work on the date November 30th. This is what I consider to be a Gematria holiday. And if you check the links down in the description below, you'll see more on this. I have a special post dedicated to the number 1331 and the date November 30th. November 30th of 1331 was the date of the total solar eclipse that went entirely over land. And this wasn't the only total eclipse that only passed over land, but it was the longest. And what's so amazing about this is in Latin Gematria, which is also called Agrippa's Key, as this cipher is sourced all the way back to the 16th century to a Masonic author called Cornelius Agrippa. In this cipher, which I consider to be the most significant in all of Gematria, the date November 30th, when you spell it out, sums to 1331. And think about how November 30th is written, 11/30. Well, 1331 is 11 cubed. And think about how 1331 is made up of the numbers 133 and 331, which both sum to 1331 in Latin. The 1331 eclipse was on November 30th. So this is a very powerful code, 1331. And what I thought was so interesting is that the United States Secretary of State position was first established back in 1789, and notice how this was on the 27th day of the month. Well, Henry Kissinger was also born on the 27th day of the month. When you measure between these dates, we get exactly 133 years and 10 months. So here we have this special 1331 alignment and news of his death on November 30th. It's all too powerful. And again, this is a code I've been talking about for many years. My first post on this was from 2017 or 2018. Also, Richard Nixon would currently be in his 1331st month if he were still alive today. So let's talk about how the moon is also synced up with this, as it's the moon covering the sun during eclipses. On the date that Henry Kissinger died, he was 1,243 lunar phases old. And of course, a lunar phase, measuring the time from new moon to new moon. So here we see a 1243. Well, another significant form of Gematria, which is connected to the Latin cipher, is standard. And the only difference here is that we use the current 26-letter alphabet. And with this large number method, the name Henry Kissinger sums to 1243, matching his lunar age. Now, every new moon gets its own lunation number. This is called the Brown lunation number. This is a count that began in January of 1923, which happens to be the same year that Henry Kissinger was born. You see, he was born during lunation 5. Kissinger was born 130 days after the first brown lunation, which was on January 17th. You'll see the new moon for lunation number 1, 130 days later. Well, if you measure to the next Great American Total Solar Eclipse, we find that today's news broke 130 days before the eclipse. And 130 is a significant number to Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones with the ampersand 130 like human sacrifice. And of course, the number 13, very significant to the moon. Consider how the word moon begins with the letter M, the 13th letter. It ends with an N, which is the 13th letter in reverse. We get a 13th lunar phase every couple years, and both the moon and 13 have the same gematria. Using capital letters, which maintains the alphabetic order but adds 26 for every capital value, the name Henry Kissinger sums to the 13th Fibonacci number. 233, the 13th Fibonacci. All right, so let's talk about how this connects to Yale University. Now, Yale University is home to the Skull and Bones Secret Society, a very famous secret society which has produced several presidents over the centuries. And Yale University just celebrated its 322nd anniversary, which is, of course, the number on the Skull and Bones emblem. And here we are in the year 2023, which has the same digits as 322. Another name for the Skull and Bones Society is the Brotherhood of Death. In the alphabetic order, Brotherhood of Death equals 187. A lot of you may recognize this as the homicide code in popular culture. Well, Kissinger's death was a span of 187 days after his birthday, and today's news broke 187 days later without the end date. The president he served under, Richard Nixon, has gematria of 187 in reverse. But Yale University is synced up to the number 666 as well. Notice how in the Latin gematria method, the Brotherhood of Death has matching 724 gematria with number of the beast. The number of the beast, as told in the book of Revelation, is of course 666. This is Kissinger's Sumerian gematria, 666. And check this out. When Yale celebrated its 322nd anniversary on October 9th this year, Henry Kissinger was 36,660 days old. A number which has that 666 right there inside of it. I pointed out earlier how he died on November 29th or 1129, which is the 189th prime number. Well, if you add 189 to its prime number connection, you get the digits 1318. And it just so happens that Revelation 13:18 is what reveals the number of the beast to be 636. This is also a number coded into Kissinger's birthday. He was born on the 27th of May, or 27/5. In the alphabetic order, the number 666 sums to 275, just like his birthday. Skull and crossbones with capitals, also 275, but 666 is truly the number of the moon. And I commonly link to this presentation. I'm sure a lot of you guys are big fans of PowerPoint. Well, I have a lot of slides for you. And this just shows how 666 and the moon are intertwined very intricately. And I thought it was interesting that when Kissinger left office, on the date that Jimmy Carter took over as president, Notice how that was the first day of brown lunation 669. Of course, a 9 and upside down 6. On the very first day of this lunation is when Kissinger left office. So he was also the secretary during lunation 666. Well, let's talk about how this is coded into Yale University from the start. Now, of course, Yale University, home to Skull and Bones, or Order 322. In the alphabetic order, Skull and Crossbones equals 223. And once again, the university turned 322 here in 2023. The skull and crossbones seem to be representative of the cross that the two eclipses stamp over the United States. Since the founding of the nation, this is the first time that eclipses like this have occurred in such close proximity to one another. If you reverse the 322 on Skull and Bones emblem, you get a 223, which is the Hebrew value of the moon. Eclipses from the same Saros series are separated by 223 lunations. And these two eclipses over the United States are separated by exactly 82 lunations, or synodic months. Now, there's another measurement of the moon called a sidereal month, which is a little bit shorter, 27.3 days. Yale University turned 322, exactly 82 sidereal months after the first Great American Eclipse. And 82 is the first number to have gematria of 666, which is very relevant because these two Great American Eclipses are also separated by 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks, and 6 days on the calendar. In the standard reduction method, the name Henry Kissinger sums to this 82 value. Again, 82 lunations between eclipses. The name Kissinger has matching reduction gematria with 666. But focus on the number 48, because this is another number connected to the moon. In Latin, the moon is called Luna, while the Hindu name for the moon is Soma, both having gematria of 48. Well, the 48th prime number is 223, part of this Skull and Bones code, like the moon. Skull and Crossbones and Masonic, both with 223 gematria, but check out how both Skull and Crossbones and Masonic also sum to 263. With capital letters, the name Kissinger sums to 263. 263 is the 56th prime. Henry Kissinger, the 56th Secretary of State. Finally, notice how Henry Alfred Kissinger sums to 110, which matches Skull and Crossbones in reverse reduction. So that's all I had for the post. Again, there's relevant links in the description below if you want to see more. One more thing I want to cover before I close this video out is I actually thought of this while I was doing this video. Well, a couple of these things I found earlier. But there's this number 221, which is also seems to be significant here. The name Kissinger sums to 221 here with capital letters involved. When Richard Nixon resigned from office, it was on the 221st day on the calendar. And what I noticed is that measuring from the date that Richard Nixon died, April 22nd, to Kissinger's death on the 29th, well, here we have 221 days, right? The prime number connection with 221 is 1381. In English Standard Gematria, the date November 30th, today's date, sums to 1381. when Henry Kissinger became the Secretary of State, he was 18,381 days old. But also from Nixon's death to Kissinger's passing, we get these same digits, 10,813. Remember, it was 1381, right? The same 4 digits there. So, you know, we're a little bit down the rabbit hole here. I'm starting to struggle for air. So I think it's time to get back to the surface. I'm going to end the video there. Thanks to everyone who's watching, whether it's live or archived. Please feel free to like, share, subscribe. Whatever you can to help grow the work. Of course, linking to the website itself and the calculator, getting people to use it, understand more about numerology is important. In 2024, my focus is going to be more on the educational side, so to speak, to kind of show people how to easier decode their lives. And I'll also be improving the website to help people make these strong, powerful connections that seem to be in our everyday lives as we stumble through this giant fishbowl we call the Matrix. All right, everyone, peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.